Welcome to the RICS World Built Environment Forum webinar, Battling the Headwinds, Navigating Construction Industry Storms and Building Resilience for the Future. I am your moderator, Ken Creighton, Director of Public Affairs and Thought Leadership at RICS. And before I introduce our panelists, I want to welcome you. We have over 500 of you on the line now listening to this webinar. Welcome. You come from 51 different countries. So it's a real honor to be reaching you out to all of you. Throughout the webinar, you are invited to ask questions, and I very much welcome you to do that. I will see your questions and try to ask them of our panelists. We have three panelists today. The first is Julia Humpidge. She's a principal of Forensic Technical Services at HKA. Julia, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Ken. It's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to a very lively and interesting discussion.
Thank you, Julia. Next, we have Stephen Blakey, FRICS, MICW. He is Commercial Projects Director at Network Rail. Welcome, Stephen.
Hello, Ken. How nice to see you again. And hello and welcome to everyone that's dialed in from around the globe. What a fascinating concept and what a great event to be involved in.
Thank you, Stephen. And we're excited to have Bola, Abisogun, OBE, FRICS, also the founder and chairman, DiverseCity Surveyors and Digital Director of BIM Academy. Bola, thank you for being here.
Good morning, Ken. Morning, everyone. Morning to my fellow panelists. Looking forward to a great discussion.
Fantastic. So before we get into the questions, I want to give a brief overview of this insightful report, the CRUX Insight report, that we can thank HKA for. Battling the Headwinds, Navigating Construction Industry Storms and Building Resilience for the Future. All projects carry risks. When not mapped effectively, disputes and claims between owners, contractors, and their backers can lead to delays, disruption, and cost escalation. Projects in process and planning at the moment must also navigate ongoing uncertainty associated with the COVID legacy, alongside tighter headwinds since the outbreak of war in Europe. The CRUX Insight 2022 report was released by HKA just this past Wednesday. You can find a link to this report pinned at the top of our Twitter feed at WBEF Community. The report has been developed through HKA's integrated research program, which analyzes data on claims and disputes in major capital projects around the world. This is the 5th annual CRUX Insight report. It reveals the impact of global headwinds and extending project overruns and escalating project costs in the delivery of construction and engineering projects. This report is the result of investigations to more than 1,600 projects in over 100 different countries. A combined CapEx value in excess of US $2.13 trillion with a T. I want to put that into context. This is greater than the GDP of Italy, which is currently at 2 trillion US, and about the same as Canada at 2.2 trillion US dollars. So the global overview: successful capital projects must factor in multiple risks, which relate to complexity, prevailing market conditions, and these macro headwinds. While many of the causes of underlying claims and disputes around the world are common, there are also specific challenges that the report highlights in different regions. For example, the report looks at Africa. The report finds that Africa is hit harder than most by the pandemic. in addition to strong inflationary headwinds. Programs in the region are susceptible to longer overruns than most other regions, in exceeding almost 83% of planned schedules. The report also looks into the Americas, finds that project timelines and budgets are already stretched. Acute skills shortages, rising labor, and input costs are increasing the risk of overheating. Claimed costs amount to more than a third, that's 33.8%, of average project CapEx in the region. Asia, lingering effects of the pandemic on labor and logistics have disrupted many contracts in a region with the highest concentration of mega projects. Claimed time extensions, which would add almost 2/3 to typical schedules, 65%. And sums in dispute are exacting a heavy toll, on average 28% of CapEx. But they are below the global average. The report finds that in Europe, war, obviously in the region, there's energy insecurity, and combined with inflation, are adding to already heavy costs of disputes. At over 38% of average CapEx, the sums in dispute are higher than in any other region. That's Europe. In the Middle East, claims for extra time from contracts were longer than any other region, on average adding more to 80% to schedules. Problems around design and structural anomalies underlie the most dominant causes of claims and disputes. The final region, Oceania, major projects are being delivered amidst an unprecedented construction boom, alongside acute skills shortages and supply chain disruption. A shift in workloads in Australia and New Zealand to more complex infrastructure projects is straining industry capabilities and capacity. Now we'll look at the top causes of claims and disputes around the globe, as reported in the CRUX Insight report. Change in scope is the top ranking cause globally. Closely related to this is a high frequency of design conflicts. Both can be attributed, at least partially, to the complexity of large construction projects. However, contract interpretation issues, second most common cause globally, should be more avoidable. Delays in granting approvals, accessing sites, issuing design information, and delivery of materials have all moved up the CRUX index ranking over the past 12 months and have been exacerbated by the long tail of the pandemic. So in my final slide before the questions, battling the headwinds, this year's report examines the global headwinds in terms of their political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental dimensions. CRUX Insight finds that the top causes of claims and disputes can be grouped into these three headline areas, relating to design, to the workforce, and to supplies. So in closing, despite these global headwinds, many regions boast strong construction project pipelines and buoyant markets, which, if combined with greater collaboration, could lay the groundwork for more effective delivery. So with that summary, I would like to invite each of our three panelists to give some brief thoughts on these headline findings of the CRUX Insight Report 2022. And Julia, could I please start with you?
Of course. So I think this year's CRUX report shows some underlying familiar causes, design, lack of understanding of the design and contract requirements is causes that we see on a regular basis. However, I think we're in very specific times at the minute. the war in Ukraine, the tail of the COVID pandemic, all of which are leading to supply chain issues, which are all going to change and alter where the risk balance should be in projects. And I think that's something we're going to have to focus on going forward.
Thank you, Julia. Bola, can I turn to you for some thoughts?
You can. Without repeating what Julia's just said and without stealing Stephen's thunder, I'm assuming we're all in the same space on this. That's quite a miserable picture you painted. And I'm ever the optimist. So I've got to say that I believe that the fundamentals of the sector haven't changed. The report has been quite consistent in the headline issues. You know, we really have a challenge around resource and people and process, right? And when in that context, it's all about data. And the data that you have very eloquently articulated seems to suggest that all of the things we can't control, including the war in Ukraine, are always going to be prevalent. The real question is, what are we going to do? What can we do as a sector to change and improve our processes and our cultural behaviors to mitigate the risks that have been identified in the report? The common theme across the world for me is that cost escalation, supply chain disruption, and client fear is constant. And I'm not sure what we can do about resolving those issues quickly, but what we can do is create better insight into those challenges and areas of concern and risks within project delivery, and think about how we get every actor, participant in the value chain involved in the process of delivery in a non-contentious way. Now, again, technology has a role to play here, and I think I'll speak more on that as we proceed in the conversation. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Yes,
thank you. I agree with everything that was said there. The report is very deft. It's very powerful. It's very well structured. In the first instance, the issues and challenges are perennial. So there's a commonality to them. What I think is happening, though, both through external influences, but also the emergence of ever increasing complexity in delivering Leviathan infrastructure, is that the consequences of some of those perennial issues are being amplified. And so you get things that you might, that I think are random in terms of conflict, but you also get things that are generic in terms of shortcomings in data, in information management, people and process. We have insufficient people. There are often issues around the competency and the bandwidth of the people that we do have, the processes and the systems that are designed to support those people in their judgment calls, their professional judgment calls, can be wanting. And the consequences of those things are amplified from where they were perhaps 3, 5, 7 years ago. But the issues themselves are perennial issues. What's really pleasing about the report is, in the interest of perhaps sprinkling a little bit of optimism, is that it not only is very deft at its analysis of the problems and the consequences, but it does then start to offer insights and flag areas and activities to mitigate against those problems where clients, suppliers, professionals, the institutions themselves can start to look and promote certain techniques that we know will make a difference. We've already had someone touch on risk allocation, et cetera, and again we'll get into this in a little bit more detail, I'm sure, but I think those techniques, if there's one thing that those techniques are designed to do on behalf of the sector, whether it's globally or domestically, it's drive structured continuous improvement. And so when you look at the techniques that we're going to talk about, ranging from people, process, systems, contractual forms, digital technology, etc., they're all designed to drive and embed structured continuous improvement which in itself will mitigate those problems and help turn the tap off the consequences and the eye-watering numbers and impact that these shortcomings and the ultimate claims and disputes have on the value proposition of investing in infrastructure and investing in construction for the betterment of the globe. So when we talk about some of these things, for me, it's great to be in a global platform, because all of the things that we're going to talk about have global significance in terms of the betterment that they can bring. And what was really pleasing was that the CRUX report didn't just simply articulate the problems, it gives some very strong pointers to the solutions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stephen. Thank you all for that insight. Now, a message to you, our audience. We have over 500 of you registered from over 50 countries, and we welcome your questions. So it's always fun to make this interactive and to know what you're thinking. So please notice on the service here, there is an opportunity to ask questions, which I'll see and very much welcome that. Let's get to our first question. And if we could start with you, Julia. Amid toughening political and economic headwinds, how are disputes likely to evolve?
Thank you for that. A huge question, as fellow panelists have touched on the broad range of issues that we have and given some hints and insights into maybe some of the ways we can move forward. I'll try and answer this relatively quickly. We've got several factors, I think, currently hugely increasing the level of uncertainty that we have globally. And wherever we have uncertainty around projects, then there are very real risks that they will go wrong and end up in disputes. We've got the war in Ukraine, we've touched upon that. Russia is a major supplier of raw materials, and with the current position, that is causing supply chain issues, particularly oil and gas. We've got steel, timber. Globally, we're seeing inflation rates rise, which adds to uncertainty around outturn costs for any project, and the cost of the materials, obviously, that will be needed to deliver the projects. And we've got the energy cost increases that we see at the minute. So all of that uncertainty means that it's more important than ever to manage the risks. And where we have seen maybe a tendency, particularly in energy projects, to allocate the risk quite to one side or the other, either to the owner of a project or to the contractor, I think what we will need to see going forward is a better understanding of which party is best placed to manage or mitigate to start with, and then manage those risks, and make sure that the risks are then allocated to the best party for that. What I think we're going to see in the short term is current ongoing projects. We're going to see a high number of disputes from them for the reasons I've mentioned already, because their contractual setups were not done in light of the situation globally where we see ourselves now. Talked about particularly EPC, so engineering, procurement, construction contracts, where effectively all of the risk for price increases, cost increases, sit with the contractor. And obviously a contractor can't mitigate. I mean, you can do certain levels of hedging, and maybe that is something that more projects need to look at going forward. It's not something that's always routinely looked at in terms of projects. And that could maybe mitigate some of the cost increases there. But I think we need to look at who is best placed to manage that, or should the risks actually be more shared across them. Supply chain issues, we've got shortages of raw materials. That's also likely to drive delays in projects if the raw materials are not available to manufacture the steel, whatever is needed. Then as a consequence, we will see delays in projects, which if the contractual setup again is not geared to that, we will see disputes coming out of that. When we look at the increasingly harsh economic situation, I think we'll see both sides driving to maintain their bottom lines, so both owners and contractors. And when both sides push in ever more harsh economic environments, it's not always conducive to focusing on the project outcome and the delivery of the project itself. We can have both owners and contractors heading into areas where they maybe haven't worked before in a drive to maintain a pipeline of workload. We can see contractors maybe working in technology sectors they haven't worked in before, or areas around the globe where they haven't worked before. And there I think we'll see issues around contract interpretation, things that are assumed or inherent in the understanding of how contracts are delivered in one area of the globe can be very different from other areas of the globe. And unless time is taken to understand that up front, I think we will see even more issues around contract interpretation. Oh, I could go on and on. I think
that's great, Julia.
I think I'll stop there and let somebody else chip in, shall I?
Okay. Well, Bola or Stephen, would you either of you like to comment on that subject?
Stephen, do you want to go ahead, buddy?
One of the things that you say that's really interesting, Julia, is actually organisations and their people being under pressure to drive recovery and looking to challenge conception previously, agreements and concepts around standard terms and conditions and what they mean, etc. And suddenly trying to push the envelope and push a point on that to drive recovery. And it's a really interesting observation, because you don't need a brand new event or a brand new area of contract law in which to pick a fight. What you're suggesting is that if the pressures are there, you can challenge, custom practice and assumptions that have been benign up to now, if you're under pressure to do so. And that's a really interesting take on where the pressures to pursue recovery that could then end up in claim and dispute might come from.
Ken, if I may, just as a final, so I just love listening to Julia and the way that she's described challenges around the world and the effect that they have on project viability. But one thing that the report does really well is highlight the fact that cultural working practices are also a major factor in terms of how the sectors and markets are behaving. Yeah, and we have, to Stephen's point, a perennial challenge around the race to the bottom on price, right? And that is having an impact on everything contained within this report. So for me, it comes back to two things really: people and process, augmented by technology. But yeah, it's a massive landscape of risk. I am feeling the pain of clients and funders who are struggling with the go, no go situation on new projects and trying to navigate the dark, treacherous waters of current projects. without realizing outturn cost. And we need to think about outturn cost in the context of whole life cycle. So if, for example, clients are now thinking, well, we can't get hold of materials, we have to change for equal and or approved, which in itself is a challenge, then the ability to deliver projects in a fair, reasonable manner for a fair price becomes even more problematic. And then the complexity of those supply chains globally is a real challenge and a headache. So we need to think about how project owners are behaving and what behaviors they are manifesting through their supply chains and now their design teams as well. So it's a massive landscape of challenge, but there's optimism in there, and I'll come.
I think that's absolutely right, Bola, and I was chomping at the bit to come in there because I absolutely acknowledge that there are pressures, and it's a great kind of strap line around driving a race to the bottom. But I think that there are a number of clients, a number of government departments, and that there are some legitimate initiatives that are making ground to promote the value proposition rather than the price or the cost proposition, which is a bulwark against that kind of market-led short-termism. The other thing that I would say is there is a brilliant kind of almost an oxymoron. There's definitely a tension between clients and when they look at the cost of their investment, the cost of capital, and the relationship between whole life cost and the capital cost. Because one of the things that is a pressure point, that, particularly for clients that are regulatory or government funded, one of the drivers is there is absolutely and rightly a pursuit for either life cycle cost assessments or ultimately whole life cost assessments. But the wick is being turned up on actually a reduced access to funds in terms of the capital investment. So the dichotomy here is, whilst it is right to take the long-term view, constraints over funding and the cost of capital because of inflation will drive short-termism. And it's a really interesting dynamic for governments, for infrastructure, owner operators, etc., to work out. Because in the current environment, trying to sell a proposition that your capital cost is significantly higher than it might otherwise be, but the benefits will be accrued over the next 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years, is a hard proposition to win at the moment, given the mood music and the pressures on various departments and clients as to where to put their money. So you're absolutely, in the right space, but there's some interesting nuances. And the thing that I wanted to convey is that yes, there are pressures that drive that kind of race to the bottom, but there's a lot of legitimate, culturally driven stuff that is looking to kind of change that equation and bring some sanity to that seesaw, so that the market isn't left alone to do that, because that would not be sustainable.
Brilliant insight. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you all. And Stephen, maybe this is a good segue into collaboration, and we can start with you, Stephen. But have you all witnessed any industry appetite to move towards more collaborative modes of operation?
Yes.
If so, what's driving this?
Okay, so thank you. It's a really important question, and it's a really important area. Just in terms of the perspective of Network Rail as an infrastructure client has been on a collaborative journey for the last 11 years and has worked hard in concert with various stakeholders, organisations, and our key supply chain to promote collaborative working and deliver much of our work through collaborative forms. But we're just one infrastructure client. I think if you look at the UK and if you look at around the world, and in fact the CRUX report picks up on this, the answer is yes, because progressive infrastructure clients, clients that are owner operators of infrastructure and need to make significant investment either for their renewals of their asset or to enhance that asset to increase its overall capability, they're all as a body moving away from transaction-based models to enterprise models. And it was one of the things that was definitely picked up by the CRUX report, which struck a chord with me, because it was great to see that they had identified that as it's something that I've personally been involved in for a long time. And some of the things I was talking to Bola about in terms that are reinforcements to this. In the UK, in 2020, the government issued the construction playbook. It was the best practice guide for government departments that want to procure construction and investment in building and infrastructure. And excuse me a second.
That's the moment.
My dog woke up. And government departments, a key component of that is collaborative working. There are other bodies within the UK, the Infrastructure Clients Group, that's been promoting an enterprise model called Project 13, which is gathering momentum. And of course, we have progressive forms of contract within the UK with a global reach, such as NEC3 and now NEC4. And clients such as Network Rail are starting to move into the space where their default terms and conditions are NEC4. And I'll touch more on this a little bit later when we talk about things like the environment and some of the things that are coming up that are going to make construction and infrastructure attractive to people, so we can deal with the skills issue. So there is a progressive movement to become more intelligent as clients, to pursue value, and to work collaboratively with our supply chain, with our designers and our tier ones. And that is driven by a cultural belief that working in collaboration with our suppliers, you'll get a more efficient, more sustainable, safer, higher propensity for right first time delivery with a fair allocation of risk and reward. And part of the sustainable proposition for working collaboratively is a commitment that it is good for your suppliers to make a profit, as long as that profit is reasonable and commensurate with the risks that they've undertaken and the achievements that they're making. So there's a real move towards doing this. One of the other aspects that I know that we'll come on to is that part of that move is a genuine betterment in terms of the avoidance of disputes. So a reduction, working collaboratively allows avoidance and early intervention. And again, it's one of the things that's been picked up by the RICS. For those of you that aren't aware, there's the Conflict Avoidance Coalition, which has progressive organizations and clients in it. And one of the key components around working collaboratively is the ability to avoid disputes or have early intervention techniques where you get prompt resolution before something gets away from you. All really powerful stuff and real big legitimate material reasons as to why clients are looking to work more collaboratively with their suppliers.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stephen. Well, Julia or Bola, would either of you like to comment on collaboration?
Julia, do you want to go first?
Thank you, Bola. I'm sure we both have something to say, as ever. I think, so my background is very much energy, and we are seeing some moves towards collaboration, but probably slower than what Stephen's just described. Energy companies, oil and gas contracting companies, everybody is driven by the need for shareholder bottom line returns. And that makes true collaboration tricky to actually get off the ground. Where we have seen some attempts, there needs to be real recognition of the change of mindset that's needed by both parties to make a collaborative work environment truly function and deliver the project effectively. We're also seeing in projects a massive squeeze on the delivery schedules, excuse me. So those two things don't necessarily go together, because in order to pause at the beginning of a project, take the time to truly understand and build a collaborative environment for the project, works contrary to the ever-shortening timescales that these projects are required to be delivered in. So I do think we're seeing movement. I do think we need to go that way, but I do think particularly in energy environments, it will take a while to get there. I think it's a slow start.
I think that's right, Julia. I think that there are pockets of excellence. If you look at Sellafield, for example, Sellafield under Project 13 was a leader within the UK in terms of refining and adopting terms and conditions where they set out culturally and then practically to collaborate with their suppliers. I think your point around constrained programs, I think it's more relevant when you look at specific interventions and perhaps short and intense investments. When you look at major infrastructure schemes that have a, if you look at rail, take HS2 in the UK, a major infrastructure investment program like that, a project has a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, it's a pop-up project. It's just a very, very big pop. And by dint of that big pop, you have a process of forming, storming, norming, performing. You have that kind of curve, and that curve is over a long period of time, a number of years. And setting out to collaborate shouldn't be something that you bolt in as a process that is part of a lead into a job. It should be right at the get-go integrated into not only your cultural thinking, but your value proposition and the way that you reach out to the market and the way that you then start to assess the competencies and the capabilities of the organizations that you're going to work with. And one of the things that's increasingly happening across various sectors is that during procurement processes, assessments of people's behaviors, their leadership behaviors, their collaborative behaviors, their competencies, how they work under stress, suddenly all of these things that weren't a weighted part of that cost or slightly value proposition are now significant quotients. And one of the things that is accelerating this is not only the view of how do you describe behaviors, what do good collaborative behaviors look like, how do you pressure test those behaviors to make sure that what you're being presented with is authentic in terms of the key people that are going to work together and make a difference. I'd invite people to go and look at the Institute for Collaborative Working's website. It's an organization fairly small but growing, has a global footprint, and what they're positioning themselves to do quite rightly is the professionalizing of collaborative working. What are the competencies of people? What are the processes for it? How do you get independent accreditation and scrutiny that says that the way that you're doing things is repeatable, is driving structured continuous improvement, and you are integrating a collaborative culture in what you do? We're very fortunate in Network Rail because we set out on this journey early, and we have some great examples and we know what works. Actually, helpfully, we have one or two instances where it was suboptimal and didn't go the way we wanted, but we understand why and we understand the dependencies. And for example, one of the dependencies that I know will be use it to Bola's is that when you integrate culturally, you also need to integrate in terms of process and systems and data, which means having one version of the truth, one common set of data that everyone has access to, not 3 or 4 different parties with their own books and their own information trying to reconcile one with the other. So I can accept your observation that other sectors will have different levels of maturity on this, but all of the seeds for a kind of rich crop in this area are there, and there are pockets of excellence in different sectors. In water, particular. In power that you mentioned, there's definitely pockets of excellence. By definition, if there's pockets of excellence, then they're pockets, and you need the general sector to step into that space. But I do believe it's happening.
Thank you, Stephen.
I'm not sure what I can add to that. But just what I would say, Ken, because forgive me, but with such granularity on the challenge around collaboration, I can safely say that the solution to Julia's perspective and Stephen's affirmation is by definition to work in a common data environment. And I'll leave it there.
Great. Well, Bola, why don't we turn to you and digital technology? How can the adoption of digital technologies provide new or better routes to claim and dispute resolution? Bola.
Well, look, thanks again for, that's more of a conversation rather than a question, Ken. But I'll start by saying, what is the consequence of not having a digital strategy for information management? The consequence of not having a good strategy equates to the core of the CRUX report, which is the value of those eye-watering numbers of claims. And is there an incentive for the sector to reduce that number? That's a question, right? Who will not benefit from more claims is a question, right? There's an obvious answer, but that's a question. It's a provocative question too, given that I have some lawyers on the call, and I don't want to put them out of business. But what I would suggest is that, to Stephen's point around cultural behaviors, the role of technology is not about removing the human being or removing the person. It's more about upskilling and enabling the person to participate in the project for the benefit of the client and society, right? That might sound warm and fluffy, but actually good data and structured information management are core principles of a successful project architecture. And in order to succeed in that space, ultimately what needs to happen is at the procurement stage, the client and the client's advisory team need to, in granular detail, forensically check the credentials of the appointed team or appointed teams and understand whether or not they can articulate the outturn of the project at the beginning of the project. So we start with the end in mind as we begin to walk into a project. And to do that well, you need to establish a common data environment.
Absolutely.
Every project, in my view, should equate to a digital twin on completion. And by digital twin, I mean a virtual representation of an asset, a system, or a process. And given that we are building physical assets above and below ground, we can only, on behalf of the client, evidence and sense check the fitness or purpose of our efforts by really looking into the performance of the asset once it's been commissioned. But to get to that successful commissioning point, we need to engage and adopt a number of different technologies. But the most important digital technology is digital skills. And the digital skills piece affects everybody. It affects the lawyers on the call. It affects all of our audience around the world, every member of the RICS, every other professional body. It affects the client. And to Stephen's point, what will the adoption of digital technologies do for the clients that want to become more intelligent, right? I talk about the intelligent client, meaning a client that actually knows what they want to achieve and is only seeking support in making the best decisions, given the constraints of funding or any other constraint in the constraints map as we see it or as they have been supplied it. But the adoption piece as an overarching mitigator of dispute is being pushed back for fear of displacement of people. So in areas of the world, for example, the emerging economies, say, for example, the continent of Africa, where the infrastructure of power is a challenge, adoption is also a challenge. It's like for like in many places. So in the more developed areas of the world, such as the West, Europe, North and South America, the Middle East, various parts of Asia, you must look to the infrastructure of those geographic locations as enablers of greater digital adoption. But the question we need to ask ourselves is the client intelligent enough to understand the value of digital technologies from the procurement of the project right through this whole life cycle? And that's a challenge that we need to educate the entire industry on.
Well said, Bola. Really, really insightful there. Key points on digital. And I am cognizant of time. We've had some amazing questions come through from the audience that unfortunately we're not going to get to all of them. We will answer your questions after the webinar. However, there's some great questions. I want to get to climate change. And Julia, for example, Greg Poole in our audience asked about how these issues are impacting the drive to net zero. And in that context, Julia, maybe you could speak to that, and also how disputes are likely to evolve as climate change policies develop.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the question. I think I'm going to answer this in the context of energy projects. We're seeing drive to net zero globally. Different countries are slightly different timeframes and slightly different ambitions, but it is a global movement. And all of that is driving green and greener energy projects. I recently had a look at the EIC database of projects, so the Energy Industry Council's database that they have of all the projects that are ongoing or around the world. There are over 300 live projects just in the hydrogen field. So all aspects of hydrogen, but hydrogen is only one solution to a greener energy source. So it just gives you a bit of an idea of the sheer scale of the drive that is ongoing. I think all of the aspects we've touched on so far are going to be brought to the forefront in these energy and cleaner, greener energy projects. We're going to see technology issues. The basic technology for a lot of these either renewable energy or hydrogen, for example, projects, a lot of the technology of how to produce has been around for decades. But what we need to do for the push to net zero is increase the scale at which these plants can be built. And we also need to be able to produce hydrogen, for example, or electrical energy in a more efficient way and transport it in a more efficient way, so that we don't have the losses that we see currently. So there's a push for new developments within existing technological fields. Both of those, wherever you have new technologies or developments in fields, the risk is much greater that the outcome will not deliver quite what you wanted, and therefore the risk of the project not delivering correctly and according to the contract is greater, and that can lead to disputes. So I do think we'll see disputes in there. I think we've talked about the supply chain. The sheer number of projects that are underway and in the pipeline in these areas will put massive strain on supply chains, all the way through from raw materials to the actual vendors delivering the equipment. I think we will see issues across the board there. Wherever there's supply chain issues, you're likely to incur delays and cost increases on projects, both of which lead to disputes. I think another area is going to be skills. We keep touching on lots of the same themes as we go through this, and the skills shortage. In what we're seeing is lots of the old oil and gas companies and contracting companies are rebranding themselves as energy companies and moving into the greener and renewable technologies, which is great. And a huge proportion of the skills that are applicable in oil and gas are also applicable in renewable energy and greener energy technologies. But there are some that aren't. So I think we will see a skills shortage around that. I would love to get back into Bola's point about the digital and common data environment, but I'm not sure how much time we've got left. So I do think technology and the common data environment can absolutely help find and use the available skills wherever they are around the world. The geographical location of the skilled workforces should no longer be that much of an issue around the design and engineering stage. It obviously still becomes an issue in the construction phase, although we can push more to modularized construction too. But I won't get into that. Right, I'm going to stop and let the others join in at this point.
Well, yeah, if maybe I can turn to you, Stephen, and then Bola with the final word. If we could end 2 minutes before the hour. I know there's only 5 minutes before the hour now, but Stephen, yes, maybe we can drill down a little bit on what Julie said about skills and the human side of things. And I do want to point out that we've had questions from Russell about team coaching and the avoidance of disputes. We've had questions from Elizabeth about reports going back to 1994, constructing the team report, which looked at revolutionizing this client-contractor relationship. And we discussed before about asking about the skills shortage as a headwind generally. So maybe you could touch on that briefly, Stephen.
I will do, and I'll go fast. I have 4 things to say, and I'll go quick because I want to make sure that there's scope for Bola and for you to close the time. So the first of the 4 things that I would say around the challenges associated with skills and resources, etc. I'm going to shamelessly steal something that struck a chord with me from the CRUX report. And that was about repositioning construction as part of the environmental solution, not as part of the environmental sustainability problem. That was really, really powerful. And I think clients, teachers, the way that we engage with schools, with young people, with universities, construction is a thing that is here to stay. Human beings will want to change their environment for the better. And actually positioning and tapping into the environmental sustainability agenda and positioning a career in construction as being part of the solution, I think is key. And I think that there's rich scope to do that. As an aside, I think people that are early in their career, young people, they're much more attuned to causes than I was and my generation were, and they will pursue professional activity that aligns to a cause that they find strong, rather than find themselves being in a sector or being in a cause by accident. So the more that construction and clients and employers do to promote that what we're doing is part of the solution and make that legitimate, the better. The second thing I would say is clients are starting to shift where the practitioners are and are looking to increase their reliance on assurance. So one of the compensatory factors that I think some clients are going through is to up the level of assurance of checking that things are being done correctly, and outsourcing or looking more to the supply chain to have a higher quotient of practitioners. So that one-to-one matching from a commercial perspective, for example, whether managing the money, managing apps and certs, the final account, forecasting, reporting, traditionally, transactionally, there would be a counterweight between client and the supply chain. Okay, if you look at progressive and collaborative forms of work and you look at what clients are doing, they're starting to use collaboration for the best person for the job. They're not doing that equivalent marking, and they're looking to turn the wick up on the assurance that they do. So part of the response to the skills challenge is for clients to place less reliance on having those skills themselves and put a greater reliance on the market. The third thing I would say is around ED&I, but perhaps not from the generally accepted perspective. I think there is still some progressive clients should be looking to make careers in construction, in commercial, in claims, etc., management, etc., all of those kind of things. They need to be a bit more open, hire for behaviors and potential. Don't constrict yourself around academic entry points. And in doing that, change some of the preconceptions and barriers that people from different communities create. They block themselves off to things because they don't think that it's for them very, very early on. And actually, progressive clients need to be better at going, no, this could be for you as much for anybody else. You don't have to come through university. And the fourth thing I would say really quickly is technology, two aspects on technology. The first one is the CRUX report talked about, I think it said 13% inefficiency of people looking for information. 13% of their time is looking for information upon which to make an informed decision. Technology should slash that and make the recovery of data, information, and stop people wasting time on archaic activities and allow them to apply their intellect and their professional skills. And of course, the other aspect is remote working. And remote working allows the agility and the flexibility to people to be efficient and, like me, work from home, despite the occasional bark from my dog, which I apologize for. But it just shows the agility and how technology can make things efficient. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, listen, I know that our other panelists are dying to make more points, but we're running out of time. So as they say, always leave them wanting more. So I think we're going to leave our audience wanting more. There's also some fantastic questions from the audience, including well said, Stephen, from John. So I am going to wrap up now. And genuinely, thank you all for the questions, and I do apologize that we didn't get to them all. So as we close, just a reminder to you all that we will publish a recording and written summary of this webinar as well as the presentation online. Please share it and take a few moments to let us know what you think in the online poll, which will appear on your screens. Join us for another webinar in the future. See our website for more details. Also, WebF Week will be happening January 16th to 20th, 2023. Global conference looking at sustainable placemaking and the net zero resilient world. Don't miss it. You can find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. I think you all know how to do that. And finally, download the app. You won't miss a thing. It's on the normal stores, and you can find all of our great thought leadership. So with that, I will say thank you. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to the panel. And thank you to HKA for a wonderful insight report. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.